The Outer Rim territories are the most prominent region of the galaxy in most Star Wars stories, from the movies to the EU to, most recently, The Mandalorian. Oftentimes, the Outer Rim is depicted as a lawless, chaotic place, thick with outlaws and bounty hunters. It's depicted essentially as the Wild West of Star Wars. But was this depiction accurate? Were the Outer Rim territories really as lawless as The Mandalorian would have us believe? In this video, we're going to be answering that question.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The short answer to that question is the Outer Rim wasn't anywhere near that simple. Even though the Republic, the Empire, and the New Republic all treated the Outer Rim as one vast region, in reality it was anything but. The Outer Rim contained plenty of Tatooine-style backwaters, but it also contained wealthy industrial worlds, like Eriadu, for example. To come up with a good answer to our question, we're going to have a look at the various regions within the Outer Rim and how they developed. The first systems in the Outer Rim to be colonized by the Republic were located around the ends of the galaxy's major hyperspace routes, especially the Polemian route and the Rimmer trade route. Not coincidentally, these regions were where the so-called civilized worlds of the Outer Rim were largely located. On the Rimmer trade route, the Outer Rim boasted some of the galaxy's most formidable industrial worlds, including Solust, Eriadu, and Sluis Van, while Republic colonies in the sectors on the Outer Polemian predated the settlement of even some core worlds. That region of space, which included the Tyon cluster, was also heavily industrialized, and during the Clone Wars it was the backbone of the CIS. There were also a lot of well-off worlds north of the Polemian as well. A long stretch of systems along the Outer-Hydian Way fit in more with the Inner Rim worlds than with Tatooine. These included Sereno, Selenon, and Telos 4, as well as the worlds of the distant corporate sector. A wide swath of the Outer Rim beyond Ord Mantell, which included the planets Mulinst, Mygeeto, and Bastion, also fell into this category. Despite their location in the Outer Rim, all of these regions were just as orderly and prosperous as the Corwood systems. Some were among the richest and most influential in the galaxy. Mulinst, for example, had literal mountains of wealth, while Eriadu's self-styling as the Coruscant of the Outer Rim was far from an exaggeration. Furthermore, regions represented the vast majority of the Outer Rim's population. With this in mind, we can say that it is not, in fact, accurate to call the Outer Rim mostly lawless. However, that doesn't mean there weren't lawless parts of the Rim. Far from it. Vast stretches of the Outer Rim territories were largely lacking in central government, especially in areas that were discovered relatively recently. A vast swath of the Rim on the eastern side of the galaxy, stretching from the borders of the Tyon cluster to the Corellian Run, was pretty much owned by the Hutts, which meant that any attempts at centralized development out there failed. The rest of the Outer Rim was sparsely settled, with few systems having more than 100 million inhabitants. It was these parts of the Outer Rim that gave the region its nasty reputation, as, indeed, they were mostly lawless. But why was that? Well, there are two answers to this. One is the Hutts. The Hutts officially controlled a sizable portion of the mid and outer rims known as Hutt space, but for most of Republic history they also controlled a vast sphere of influence beyond Hutt space's borders as well. Across this stretch of space, the Hutts and their cronies routinely bought out local governments and thwarted Republic colonization efforts. Tatooine was one world located in this sphere of influence, as were most of the Rim's so-called hives of scum and villainy. On these worlds, Hutt influence was simply too strong for the Republic or even the Empire to do anything about the predominance of the criminal underworld. They had no real incentive to either. Large swaths of this region had very low populations. Aside from the ones that the Hutts had settled in the first place, most planets were inhabited by less than 1 million settlers each. Tatooine, one of the most well-known planets in this part of the Outer Rim, only had 200,000 colonists living on the entire planet. For governments that had to manage a galactic population over 100 quadrillion, those systems weren't even worth thinking about, never mind going to war with the Hutts over. But the Hutts didn't control the entire Outer Rim, and most of the lawless sectors of this region were outside of the Hutt sphere of influence. The blame for their lawlessness falls mostly on the shoulders of the Republic. Exploration of these regions, which were nicknamed the New Territories, the Trailing Sectors, and the Western Reaches, respectively, happened mostly during the Inter-Sith Wars period. From 3,000 years before the Battle of Yavin to 2,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Republic sponsored mass colonization in these parts of the Rim, hoping that opening up more of the galaxy would make it easier for it to rebuild from the old Sith Wars. Instead, mass colonization created hundreds of new sectors, which strained the Republic to its limits. The Senate became too packed to get anything done, and slowly, the entire Republic began to crumble. In 2000 BBY, the new Sith Wars began, a devastating conflict that taxed the strength of the Republic even further. The Republic quickly abandoned most of its new colonies in the Outer Rim to the new Sith, and over the course of the next 1,000 years, it hemorrhaged territory, no longer capable of supporting itself. In 1100 BBY, the Republic all but collapsed, retreating to the core worlds and a few narrow pockets of space along the major hyperspace lanes. This period, the Republic Dark Age, lasted for a full century. When the new Sith Wars ended in 1000 BBY, Supreme Chancellor Tarsus Valorum announced the Ruusan Reformations, which formally recognized the Republic under a much more efficient system. The next millennium or so was known as the Golden Age of the Republic, as the galactic government quickly put itself back together and ushered in a new age of peace and prosperity. But this wave of rebuilding left a lot of the Outer Rim behind. Many remote colonies were hesitant to rejoin the Republic after having been abandoned for so long, and those that did rejoin the Republic found that it was unable to properly defend them against pirates and other threats. Over the course of the Golden Age, the Republic tried to rebuild and recolonize the more remote parts of the Outer Rim, but it was met only with mixed success. As part of this initiative, the Republic declared most of the Outer Rim a tax-free trade zone to encourage the Trade Federation and other megacorporations to help out. To nobody's surprise, however, these corporations just went around buying up planets and exploiting them for wealth, which really didn't help matters. As a result of this, the Republic ultimately ended the tax-free status of Outer Rim trade, which the Trade Federation blockaded Naboo in protest of 32 years before the Battle of Yavin. The Republic's failures in the Outer Rim, as we all know, led to the Clone Wars, which ended with the Outer Rim in an even worse state than it had been previously. When the Empire arose, one of its core promises was to bring civilization to the Outer Rim, but in reality, all it really did was exploit Rim worlds for resources. By the time the New Republic came around, those colonists that were left in the Outer Rim were skeptical of offers of aid from Coruscant, and many chose to remain independent of the central government. For the most part, these systems came up with their own forms of law and order. It was, after all, possible to not be heavily populated and a constituent of a galactic government while also not descending into total chaos. We saw a bit of this in The Mandalorian, as Navarro appeared to have been well on its way to becoming a reputable trading port, despite the relative absence of the New Republic. Bespin, Errol-Nar, and many other lawless Rim worlds took similar paths, even in the years before the Clone Wars. This was largely why those parts of the Rim were so resistant to galactic government, no matter what form it took. Many worlds out there were doing just fine on their own, no matter what the elites on Coruscant thought about their homeworlds. Additionally, a whole lot of planets on the Rim just weren't ever colonized by the Republic, Empire, or New Republic. Some of these worlds, like Geonosis, Barab 1, and the forest moon of Endor, had their own native species, who got along just fine without the outside galaxy coming in and mucking up the works. Many others like Hoth, Vancor, or at the time of the movies Korriban, just didn't have any notable inhabitants or anything that would attract colonists. So that's our look at the Outer Rim and whether or not it was really as lawless as the Mandalorian made it seem. But what do you think? Would you be interested in hearing more about any of these regions? Let us know in the comments section below. And just before you go scrolling off into the other suggested videos, guys, I have my own channel suggestion for you, and if you're interested in high quality history videos where we take a look at badasses from all different eras, check out our new channel called The Brave. That's the first link in the description below. And if you're just in the mood to listen to some mad beats, check out our Relax Shack music channel, where we use a lot of the music posted there in our videos here on Geetsly's. And if you want to help support the channel and get access to a behind the scenes Discord server where you can directly interact with myself and the team, consider donating to our Patreon. And if you just want to join our wider community, check us out on our main Geetsly's Discord and our Geetsly's Gaming Network. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.